All right, good morning. It is 8:50 and we're ready for our session here and get everything set up. We are currently recording. If you have questions, feel free to throw those into the chat box and I'll do my best to answer them as we go along. My name is Andreas Johansson. I'm the Director of Operations at Streetsboro City Schools. That's over in Northeast Ohio, just north of Akron, south of Cleveland. Today's session is beautiful data with Google Sheets. We're going to take a look at how we can manage our spreadsheet data a little bit more, a little bit more easier, perhaps. We'll take it from there. Hopefully everyone can see the screen. Should look at beautiful data with Google Sheets here. I'm going to go into presentation mode. If you can't, let me know. Just throw something in the chat, but I'm assuming that you can see it. We'll go about 50 minutes. The session is recorded, so it'll be available to you later to go back and review if you wanted to. So I'll go at a pretty fast clip. Make sure that you grab the demo sheet in the chat feature as well. There's a link that'll create a Google Sheet for you. So beautiful data, Google Sheets. There's the address. I put that in the chat as well. We're going to preview some concepts today. We're going to look at the basics. We're going to look at sorting data. We're going to look at filtering data with a spreadsheet. We're going to look a little bit at how to validate data, change it, and then format it. And we'll go in a certain order here. I like to have data work for me. I work with a lot of data from different vendors, from different testing companies, from different student information systems, and then having to put the data into a certain format in order to sort of make it happen for systems that we have.
So if you click start video, they'll see you. And if you click that.
Go ahead. Okay. So how do we do all of that? Well, we start by fixing the data, and then we sort it, and then we use it. And since we're in education, there tends to be certain ways that we organize data, typically by last name. And so we're going to look at some of those things here this morning. And then there's some review of some concepts. But I'm going to jump right into my demo sheet here. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. So this is Google Sheets. We're looking at our first intro sheets called the Basics tab if you're in there. And it might be helpful to kind of like watch first and then kind of noodle around and then, get stuck on something that you like to work more on. But I'm going to show you some of the basics that I do in a spreadsheet when I get into some data. Just to review, these ones here, the ones that go left to right, we call those rows. And the ones that go up and down, we call them columns. Most people know that, but A, B, C, D, those are the columns. 1, 2, 3, 4 are the rows. And if you've been around for a while, you know that spreadsheets have changed. And so it used to be that those headers were frozen, this and that, or whatever. We'll look at some of that today. Here's what we're going to do. So I'm looking at some data here. This is very typical data from a student information system. It doesn't look all that great because I can't really tell what it is. I have some idea, maybe, but the first thing I want to do is I want to expand the columns to see the text data. So the way I do that is I can come up here at column A or column B, doesn't matter which one, and I move my cursor until it turns blue right in between sort of A and B or B and C. And I can then grab it, I can click my mouse and drag it and then kind of expand the column out a little bit like that. Now I have an idea that, oh, there's a name in there. It looks like maybe a first name or something. Another easy way to do it is to just move your mouse to where you get that blue line again and then double click. And what the spreadsheet will do in that instance is it will size the column to the widest value in the column. Very helpful if you want to do it very quickly. It can be very frustrating if you have lots of data in that cell. So that means that if you have, like lots and lots of stuff, it will kind of maximize very quickly.
Yeah.
So how do we do that then sort of quickly for the whole sheet so you don't have to go through multiple columns? Well, I typically come up here and I select the box in between the A and the 1. And I select the whole spreadsheet. Another way to do that is Control A or Command A, but typically that box up here in between A and the 1, you highlight it and then you just pick any of the columns and watch what happens. Put my cursor right in between the, the C and the D or the D and the E, and then I double click and it'll now resize all of the columns at one time. to the widest value in the sheet. Thanks, Nick, for posting that link again to the demo sheet. And so again, if you had a spreadsheet, now you have sort of an idea of what's in here. So I'm going to look at the columns because we don't have any headers, and so we're going to fix that next. So we have Catherine Acker, 4, ILAG, Tracy Frater. I see some similarities here. I'm going to guess that columns E and F are maybe like teacher names because I see a lot of them at the same time, right? And then I'm going to assume that A and B are probably student first and last name, and then C and D are probably grade level and course name or something like that. So I like to name them. If I get a spreadsheet that doesn't have header data in it, I'm going to do that myself. So I'm going to click on row 1 there. I'm just going to left click on it, and then I'm going to right click, and then I'm going to say insert a row above because I'm going to make my own header row, and then I get an empty row. And then I'm going to type in first name, last name, grade, course, I think it is, and then teacher first, and then teacher last. Now it's very important up here when you're looking at sort of how I name the headers, you have to come up with your own standard. So instead of kind of assuming that there's a right way, if you're the person that works with a lot of data, come up with a standard for yourself. I like to have the headers in all capital letters. It makes it simple for me, it makes it easy for them to stand out, and it's typically easy for other people to understand as well. Now notice here, column C, you know, it has that grade in there, but it's real small. So double click, expand it, and then you're good to go. So you might have to do that a couple of times to get your data to work for you. The other thing I like to do is if I'm not going to do anything additionally with this spreadsheet, I'm going to scroll to the right. So I can grab the scroll bar at the bottom, or I can do that with a sort of a scrolling mouse if I have that. And I notice that I have columns G through X or Y that I'm not going to use. And for my purposes, my standard is that I try to get rid of unnecessary things. So if I don't use those columns, then I don't need them. So I'm going to start by marking column G. And what I could do is I could then sort of right click on column G and then go in and say, you know, delete column. But nothing really happens because there's still the same amount of columns there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on G, and then I'm going to mark all of them to the right. And so I'm going to use a keyboard shortcut. So hold on. This is, I know it's early in the morning, but if you hold on Control and Shift and then hit your right arrow, you'll mark all of the columns to the right. So again, if I just start by highlighting column G, I hold on Control and Shift at the same time, and then I hit my right arrow, I will then quickly select all of the columns to the right. And then I can go in and I right click on any of the column headers, and then I say delete columns G through X. And so now I don't have 10,000 columns to the right that will get in my way. I want to do the same thing with the rows. So I'm going to kind of scroll down, take a look at how big this sheet is. Okay, so about 396. And then it goes all the way down to 1,000. So if I'm not going to use that, I want to do the same thing. I want to kind of get rid of those rows that I don't need. So I highlight row 397. I hold on Control and Shift, and you guessed it, the down arrow will then should highlight all of them, right? A little bit slower here in the morning. And then I can do the same thing, right click, and then delete rows 397 to 1001. So now I have a spreadsheet that is only A through F column wise, and then 1 through, what is it, 397 or something like that, 396. Now I have a lot smaller spreadsheet. So that's a little bit about how to clean it up. Now, notice that when we scroll down, and this one takes a few people for a loop, and I'm always excited to show it because people have been in spreadsheets for a long time and they don't know how to do it or haven't been able to figure it out. And again, this is Google Sheets, it works online. All of these features that I'm showing work in Excel as well. So it's not sort of one or the other. They may have different ways of getting there, but same basic functions. So if I'm scrolling down, all of a sudden I lose my headers, and that's very inconvenient, I think. Now I don't know which one is which, and it's sort of useless to me. So what I want to do is I want to freeze the top row or the header row. Two ways of doing that. The first one is to go into the View menu up here, and then your first option is to freeze, and then you can freeze no rows, 1 row, 2 rows, up to current, you know, like all of them or whatever. And you can even freeze the columns. So we're just going to say freeze 1 row. And what happens is, notice it moved this gray line underneath row 1. If Fantastic. So now when I scroll down, watch what happens. The header row stays in the same place. So now I know, even if I'm down on row 100, I now know what columns are what and what they mean. Very, very convenient. Now, there's one way to do this. I can go back and freeze no rows. There's another way to do it. And this is how I typically do it because I think it's faster for me. I come up here and notice that box between A and 1, you can see that sort of gray, thicker outline there. And you can simply come down and watch until your cursor turns into a hand, like sort of the, I don't even know, is it like gloved, almost like a Mickey Mouse glove. That's what I'm going to call it, I think, a Mickey Mouse glove. And I'm going to click and drag it, and it looks like I'm sort of grabbing a hold of it, and then I just drag it down, boom. And I do the same thing. I've frozen a row, and I can freeze as many rows as I want there, and that's why I like it. So if I want to freeze the top 6 rows, I can do that, or if I just want to do the first one. And I can also do the column. So if I want to freeze columns A and B, I can do that. So if I have a really wide spreadsheet, if I'm scrolling to the right, I can preserve column A, B, or however many columns that I need. Could be super handy. Typically, we preserve things that we like to sort by. So that's how you freeze the columns a little bit. And I'm going to unfreeze them because you'll see here in a little bit. We're going to move some columns around. So speaking of that, typically in education, so now that we have some idea here, first name, last name of students, teacher, first name, this looks like roster data to me. So typically for my purposes, again, dealing with roster data, I like to go by last name, then first name. That's typically how we do things. Certainly how I did my class lists when I was a teacher in the classroom. And it's typically what I do now as I work with roster data for the whole district. Notice that first name and last name, they're not in the right place. Inconvenient. So instead of copying and pasting or whatever, you can do the same thing. So come in, get that Mickey Mouse hand, just hold on to it, grab that column and move it over. And then you're just basically swapping columns A and B. So now column A is the last name, column B is the first name. And I know what you're saying. A lot of people get super nervous about data shifting left and right. I think we've all been there where we've done some sorts and then all of a sudden now the last name doesn't match up with the correct first name. It just takes a little practice to get comfortable with what you're doing. It shouldn't be a big deal. You could do the same thing here. So you can say, well, move the grade to the end, move the course to the end. So now I just have sort of a different order. It doesn't move the data up and down. It just moves our data left and right in columns. So now I'm going to go ahead and freeze it again. I'm going to freeze that top row. So now I have the data in the way that I want it. Let's talk about formatting real quick. I like to use fonts that are easy to see for me. So I'll demonstrate what I mean here. If I go and click this, the whole spreadsheet, and again, Control A will do the same thing. Or if you're on a Mac, use Command and then whatever it is. I'm on a Mac, but typically a lot of people on our PC or a Chromebook. So you have Control and Command are interchangeable. So if you're doing Control A to select everything, that's Command A on a Mac, for example. But I'm going to select everything and I'm going to go in and switch to a font here that might look nice, but for all purposes in a spreadsheet, does not work real well. It could be okay if you're going to print it out or whatever, but go for clarity, go for readability, go for quick and easy as opposed to styling up, especially when you're working in a spreadsheet. So I like this font in Consolata or in Consolata. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but it's pretty evenly spaced. It's easy for my eyes to see, and it's typically something that's approachable in terms of font choice. The other thing I like to do is I like to make the top row bold. And so I do that by marking the top row, and then I can come up here to the sort of the format bar and hit bold, or I can just hit Control or Command B to make it bold. I like to get my keyboard involved. I do a lot of keyboard shortcuts because over the years that tends to be a little bit faster. So something to think of. The other thing I do is I highlight the top row, and then I will usually fill it. And I don't know if there's a keyboard shortcut for that, but I typically come up and I fill it with like a yellow so that it really stands out. That seems to work for me. The other thing we want to do is I want to center the text. Notice that this is sort of a position at the bottom, and then there's text all over the place. It's kind of an even, uneven spacing. I highlight the whole sheet and I come up to the vertical alignment toolbar, and I just hit middle alignment, and then the text moves up. And then what you can do is same thing that we resized the columns, right? You can do the same thing with the rows. And so you can just double click on a row and it'll resize for you. So if you wanted to select all of them and then resize according to the values that are in there, you could use the same technique to do that. So now we're looking at data that looks a little bit better than what we got before. A little bit more easy to maneuver, a little bit easier to use. All right, so far so good. Now we're going to switch into sorting and filtering. So again, we talked about this roster data. We think it's, some sort of a class list. It looks to me like it's multiple classrooms in the same grade level, although we do have grades 4 and 5 here. So we want to make some heads or tails there. Typically when you sort, you tend to sort by one column or multiple columns, and you do that for the whole spreadsheet, the whole data set. And so in this case, say we want an idea of like who's here by last name and first name. Easy to do. So we start by selecting the whole spreadsheet, data, and just a quick heads up for those of you in the meeting, if you're not on mute, go ahead and mute yourself. So we select the whole sheet, we go up to data, and then we have some options there. Sort the sheet by column A, sort the sheet, sort the range. So, I'm just going to sort range. That's where I like to go because this is sort of a quick and easy, but this sorting the range. So the 5th option down there is going to give me more control. So I'm going to click sort the range. It'll then ask you, it'll say, okay, well, looks like we're going to sort A1 through F396. That's a whole data set. So that's good. Sort by column A. Well, like we named column A, so the data does have a header row. Now watch what happens there. It's kind of cool. So we just say data has a header row. And now instead of by column A, it'll allow you to pick, like, do you want to sort by last name, first name, teacher last, teacher first, teacher last. And this is where that standard comes in for you. So if you set your own standard, this becomes prettier and easier to understand. And so you're helping yourself by putting sort of better column headers in as opposed to just sort of lowercase stuff or whatever else that you want. Because then when you can tap into the power of the spreadsheet, it'll do it for you a little bit easier. So we're going to say sort by last name, A to Z, and then add another sort column. Then I want you to sort by first name, right? So that's it. So now we're going to sort the whole sheet by last name, then first name, and we're going to click sort. Done. So let's see if it did that. So we have Acker, Adante, Akins, Elant, and then so on and so forth. We'll go down. Looks like we did what we wanted. But notice that, now it doesn't really matter because we're kind of out of grades and teacher last, this and so on. So let's see what we can do again. Go to data, sort range. Data has a header row. But in this case, let's sort it by teacher last name and then by student last name, student first name. So let's see what happens. So now notice that we sorted by teacher last name, Janet Austin, right? And then all of our students over here are now sorted Valentine, Black, Sarah, Ciancolo, Navila, Dixon, so on and so forth. So very handy. Now notice too that it sorts the whole data set all the way down. So if you then, depending on what you're doing with it, you might have to look for your data. So we're gonna do that next. But this is how to sort the whole sheet. I want to caution you out there if you're working with roster data and if you are tasked with kind of sharing that roster data with someone else, use what we're going to use next, which is a filter, as opposed to kind of cutting and pasting and deleting. I see a lot of people, they come to this point in their sheet, they've sorted it, and they're like, great, now we have all of Janet Austin, so then I'm going to go cut and paste. I'm going to select, I'm going to cut and paste and do something else. That takes too long. All you got to do is filter it, which is what we're going to do next. Just give me 1 minute here. Let's see. Just responding to my superintendent there. So now we're going to filter. So we sorted, but we're going to filter because what we really want, and we're going to pick on a teacher here. We're going to go to April Eiler. We'll pick April. We're only interested in April's data or her roster. And notice that there's lots of other things here. So we don't really want that. And we don't want to delete it. So a lot of people will do, to get to this point, they'll delete it and then they won't be able to recover the data. There's a better way. So here's how we do it. select the whole sheet, come up to it's called the filter, create filter. Some people think of this as a martini glass. I think of it as a funnel. So we go from the wide data set down to the narrow data set. So from wide to narrow. And instead of clicking the drop down, just click the button itself. Just go bloop. And you'll notice that the header kind of turns a little green. The rows turn a little green. And you'll notice this drop down, sort of a new menu item next to each header here. You may have to resize. So sometimes when it adds that little drop down menu, it'll kind of shrink stuff. So you might have to portion your spreadsheet again. But here's what we're able to do. Using a filter, we're now able to say, I only want to see this portion of the spreadsheet, and you can still sort the data. So we wanted to look at Eiler, I think, right? So we're going to select that from column D because that's where Eiler exists. We're going to click the little filter button, and then we have a couple of options here. But notice at the bottom, it kind of reads all of the options that are available in that column. And so they're all checked, which means we're seeing the whole spreadsheet. So instead, we just click clear, and we scroll down to Eiler, and that's the only one that we now want to see. I click OK. And then notice what we have. We have a spreadsheet only full of Eiler's data. Fantastic, without having deleted anything. All of the other data is still there. Notice that you have your funnel symbol now kind of selected to say, we're filtering by the teacher last name. So just a heads up, we're filtering, which means that there's additional data available. So if you want to see that, you'll have to do something about it. So that's helpful if you're working with data. If someone sends you a big data set, and you notice that stuff is filtered, you might have to go in and kind of unfilter or kind of see what else is there. Now we can still do what we did before, so we can still very much quickly kind of click here. Okay, sort by A to Z. It's already sorted by A to Z. She only teaches 5th grade, so that's okay. But what we can do is we can break it down even further. So imagine you're doing kind of like reading intervention scores, things like that. Very simple to then go into the student column as well and say, well, we only want to look at Berlin, Caldwell, Eberhardt, and Jerzimbach. Click OK, and we're filtering our data set. Now, all of the other data is there. I know some of you are probably panicking and you're thinking, well, did you delete everything else or what happened to it? And that's very typical when you're working with filters. People kind of freak out because they think it's deleted. Still there, still accessible, because again, notice that you are now filtering by last name and by teacher last name. But this is a quick way of kind of pulling up some scores based on what you want. If you had reading data in there, some sort of performance data, you could very easily filter by that as well to show me everyone with a score of 80 and above, show me everyone with a 60 or below, because it understands numbers, and you could do that. You could even filter by things like show me all the rows where the date is after yesterday or something like that, if you have date data. Now to see all your data, just go in, click here, say, okay, I want to select all of it, click OK, come back in here, say select all of it, click OK, and you're back to the whole spreadsheet. Nothing was deleted, nothing was removed. You have access to it all. And so that's super, super helpful when you're working with lots and lots and lots of data. So that's a little bit about the basics of spreadsheet manipulation if you're getting kind of raw data from someone to put it in a format that you want. We sorted some data. We played with some fonts. We did some basic filtering. There's obviously more to it. And so it's just a matter of exploring. Keep in mind that Google Sheets, you can't really break it. You can always step backwards in time. If you get a sheet from someone and you don't want to mess it up and you're an editor in their sheet, just make a copy. Come up here, say File, make a copy, and then you have yourself a whole new copy that you can work with. The other thing that I do sometimes, especially for working with data out of Google Forms, come down to the tab itself down here at the bottom. It might be hard to see on the screen share, but click on the drop down and then just say duplicate, and then it'll just duplicate that tab. And now you can mess around in that tab to your heart's content. To delete it, obviously, you go back and delete, and then it'll say, do you want to delete that sheet or whatever, right? But you could always step back in time. Every click that you do is sort of saved, and you can recover, no problem. So we're going to move on to kind of just some quick lists, because I think that's helpful, and then we'll kind of step back to some formulas. But I wanted to show you some lists. So go to the lists tab if you're playing along at home. A lot of people use spreadsheets for various different things. So if you're a teacher, for example, you might be making rosters. If you're a central office person, you might be making a calendar for what you're going to do in a different months and so on and so forth. Spreadsheet knows what you're putting in there, especially Google Sheets. It's kind of smart. Excel isn't really to this point yet because it doesn't really talk to the internet necessarily, but this is one of the features that I love in Sheets. So if I want to make a list, 1, 2, 3, some people then go, 4, 5, and they keep typing. And say you're doing a list for like 7,000 people or 500 or whatever, that's arduous. But all you have to give the spreadsheet is 3 things. So 1, 2, 3, click and drag and highlight. And then notice that you have that blue box at the bottom right-hand corner. Click it, drag it down, and it knows what you're doing. And it says, oh, you're making a list. How long do you want the list? Doesn't matter. It'll just keep going. And then it kind of just adds to it. January, February, March, right? It knows that those are the dates, and it'll just put it in the same order. Same thing with the weekdays. So this could be really super simple for you. A number order, same thing. It understands that these are wanting to continue 2017, 18, 19, 20, 21. Same thing with the dates, right? It knows what the dates are. Notice if you're clicking here, this is kind of an old template or whatever. I'm clicking on 5.1 there, so E1. Notice that the date is actually 2017 because I've used this template for a little bit. That's okay, right? Reuse. But if you were to put in just kind of like, what is today? 10/12. It would assume, if you come up here, it would assume that it's 10/12/2020, and it would assume correctly. But just know that the spreadsheet actually knows what date it is, which is super helpful because you can even do things like this. You can say, what time is it now? And it'll put that in there, right? So that'll come to us with formulas here in a little bit. All right, let's look at this last couple of columns here. Yellow, green, pink. Do you think that'll repeat? It will not, right? Doesn't know what that is. High, medium, and low doesn't really make any sense. And so it'll just kind of copy those values down, but it doesn't really know that you're wanting to kind of create some sort of a scale or anything like that. So just something to think about. All right, let's go back to formulas because you saw me type in an equal sign there, and this is what people get pretty nervous about sometimes. They get nervous about formulas, but that's okay. So here we're going to look at sum, average, unique, and count. Very simple formulas. We'll start with a sum. We have a couple of numbers, right? We have numbers. Think of it as test data. We could easily have student names over here. So why don't we do, let's see, John, Caleb, Susie, Calvin, right? Whatever it might be. If I repeat that down, oops, it'll just recopy them. But say we have, like student data like this, and we want to see what the sum is for some reason on a test score. All I do is I click equal sign. That always starts a formula. So the equal sign, and then I type in sum, and it'll help you, like what are the formulas you're looking for, and we want to add it all up. Say you're doing a budget, and then it gives you the helpful way to sort of structure that formula. And this is what I really love. Like this is how I learned a lot of the stuff that I know in Sheets, is by kind of just playing around a little bit, looking at the helpful text that comes up, Googling that, maybe saying like, well, how do I do this in conjunction with that? In this case, you just need to mark the whole sort of the whole range here. So you just go up and click and drag, and you say, boom, hit enter, 669. That's the sum. And if something changes, right? So if they get a different score, it'll just automatically update it. Something that's interesting is I watch a lot of people do budgets and things like that in a spreadsheet, and they don't ask the spreadsheet to do the heavy lifting of calculating. And so then they do that manually, and that tends to not work out. All right, column C, say these are all test scores for our students. We want to find out what the average is. Equal sign, average, right? And by now, look at how it has kind of figured out. It's even giving you a suggestions like, hey, are you looking for an average between C2 to C16? Yes, I am. And then it just shows you the formula. You hit enter, 44.6. And again, if this becomes 765 or whatever it might be, right, that average will continue to update itself. So super, super helpful in terms of, instead of you having to do the heavy lifting. So an average is actually, right, like the sum of all the test scores divided by the number of test scores. But in the spreadsheet, it's just the formula average. Unique is another formula that might be helpful. It just means that you're checking for the number of unique values or unique rows, and it'll just say, here they are, right? So sometimes you have duplicate scores, so that might be helpful to look for some duplicate scores. And count, we'll just do, let's see, it will just count the number of values in a range. And so if you need to count, for example, how many t-shirt orders do you have, or how many tests that you actually take, you can use the count formula. I think if results is something we'll look into at a different time, just in terms of our time commitment this morning. But basically, there's a way to say, if this is true, then do that. And so that would be the if formula. So for example, you could say, if they have a test score of 80 or above, they get a B. If they have a test score of 90 and above, they get an A. And you could automate that to your heart's content. You just have to play around a little bit about how to do that formula. But once you have it, you could certainly use that and do your own grading. That's what a lot of our student information systems do, or like online grade books. That's the function that they play. They are just basically a fancied up version of a spreadsheet. Let's go to concatenate. That's the one at the bottom here, sort of the third tab over. That's a formula that I find myself using all the time. Concatenate, and then the opposite is split. Concatenate puts things together, and split splits data apart. This is especially helpful if you're doing roster data, if you're working with wanting to create things from different values in a column. And this, just a heads up, this is where I typically tend to lose some people, because they may never need to use it, or they might have never thought about using a spreadsheet this way, but I just want to show you that it's possible. So say we have our Catherine Acker. Again, this looks like student data. And so we're just going to sort of say first name, oops, last name. And then what I really want is I want a last first. I want it in this format, right? So maybe I'm doing some sort of a roster data and I just want it to be output that way. Spreadsheet can do that for you. So it's very simple. So I'll show you how that works. Notice how I'm resizing the spreadsheet here kind of on the fly, just to give you an idea of what you can do. So again, instead of concatenating, I see a lot of people copying and pasting. They're putting in the comma themselves. I mean, there's hours and hours and days to try to do roster data for hundreds of students or whatever it might be. Concatenate will take it and do it for you. And I'll even show you how to like clean up some data real quick here. So Catherine Acker, the way we would want that is we would want Acker, comma, and then a space, and then Catherine. And so we're just going to take columns A and B, and we're going to concatenate them in here. And just stay with me, and I'll explain as I go. So I'm going to start out with an equal sign, and then I'm going to type in concat, and you'll notice that there's two things, concat and concatenate. Concat only does two values. I almost always choose concatenate, because that can append or do as many strings as I want. And they do the same thing. So we're going to start with string 1. We want that to be the last name. So I'm going to just click on the last name, and it'll actually bring in B2. And here's what I find helpful. Again, this might be hard in the screen share, but notice that it'll show you as you're building the concatenate formula, like what is it going to look like? And that's super helpful from a sort of an editing or like a learning perspective. Because if I just did this, like I just said, well, now I want the last name. Well, like you have to do something. To separate things, concatenate needs a comma. So you're going to put in a comma, and then notice that your help screen comes up again, and it tells you how to build it. So it says, you know, concatenate, put something in, put a comma in, put the next string in, and we're going to put the next string in. So we're going to put in A2. But notice what happens here. See how you have Acker, Catherine, and it's just like one on the other, and there's no space and there's no comma. We don't want that. So in between, what we're going to want to put in is we're going to put in that comma and the space. Now, that's normal text. So any normal text that you want to put in there has to be within double quotes. So I'm going to start with a double quote, and then I'm going to put in my comma, and then I'm going to put in my space bar, and then another double quote. And then that is the text value that I want to put in there. And then to separate that from the first name, I put in another comma. Then I select the first name. And then notice here, my formula up at the top here looks correct to me, right? And then I'm going to close it with an end parenthesis, although you don't have to, because Google Sheets kind of assumes that. That I will say this is the big difference here. Excel will go crazy. Excel will be like, you don't have the right end parentheses. And so now I'm just going to fail you. Google Sheets is helpful. I'm going to hit enter and look at that, Acker Catherine. Now, of course, this is a formula, right? So notice here, if you have a formula there. So to repeat the formula, click and drag, and we repeat the formula all the way down. Isn't that beautiful? I think it's beautiful. So super, super, super duper. And again, that's the concatenate. This one is worth going back and kind of reviewing a little bit. Not super hard. You can do it. Just takes a little while to kind of figure out where all the commas are. And again, the way I put this comma in here was that I actually to put the comma in between double quotes, and I can do any text that way. And I'm going to give you one more example here with concatenate. So I'm going to delete these. I'm going to say bloop out. I'm going to show you how to do like a quick email, for example, where we're just appending some text. So say we want all the emails to be like the last name and then something else. We just say concatenate, say grab the last name, and then we're going to put in our own text at mail.com. Notice how it builds it correctly, end parenthesis, off we go, and then we have a bunch of email addresses. So very super, super simple for what we have going. And that's how you would do concatenate in order to put data together. You can do lots with that. Takes a little while to get really good at it, but noodle around. Now we're going to do the opposite. So we're going to go down to the split. Sometimes you get what's called comma separated data or CSV data. That is data that we get from typically some sort of a testing database or an output from another spreadsheet function. A lot of student information systems or sort of rostering databases prefer comma separated values because it knows what it is and it just splits it by the comma. The commas aren't actually part of the values. It's just to say, here's one value and then here's another value and here's another value. So that's what we have in this case. So we have Sally Whitaker, comma 2018, comma McCarran House, comma 312, comma 375. I'm not 100% sure what this is, some sort of address data. But to split that apart in Google Sheets, we can use a formula called split. So now notice, and I'm going to expand that here a little bit, but notice that this value is only in column A and it flows over a little bit. But then if you look at column B, there's nothing there. So all we got to go is go to your column B, start with a split, select the text that you're going to split apart, which is in column A. And then the split command wants to know, well, what's the delimiter? Right? So how do you break up the data, or what's the delimiter of the data? Well, in this case, it's a comma. And so what we're going to do is we're going to put in double quote because it's text, or comma, double quote, end parenthesis. And now let's see what happens. I hit return. It grabs it, and then we can repeat that data out. And now it just grabs the data, splits it into different columns. And so that's how you would get sort of comma separated values into their own columns. Very helpful. I've seen people do this manually. A couple of years ago, I worked in a district and I went down to an elementary school and they sat and inputted testing data from a comma separated value document into a spreadsheet manually, cell by cell. Took them 3 weeks. And I said, well, what about this way? And we did it in 15 seconds and it was not pretty. But just know that if you have text almost any way that you can get it, a spreadsheet can probably fix it and can probably make it happen pretty easily. So just something to think about. Let's see where we would go next. Let's go to sort and filter a little bit more. I just want to show you a practical application here. Sometimes you go to a conference, they give you the conference schedule, and you just want to see things that you want to see. So in this case, we have all of the sessions, all of the descriptions for a conference. And notice that as soon as I start scrolling to the right, right, I lose the first column there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to freeze that. And this is kind of just a review to show you how powerful it is. And I'm going to highlight all of it. I'm going to create the filter. And then I'm going to say, show me only the Monday sessions. Show me only the sessions by these 3 people. And there we go. Very super simple. This is, I think, from a Google conference a couple years ago. All the rest of the data is there. Helps you maneuver, helps you do the things that you need to do. Let's go to conditional formatting. This is a big spreadsheet, has lots of stuff on it. So I'm going to work very quickly to put it through sort of that basic stuff again, right? So first I'm going to delete row 1. And the reason I'm doing that is because we don't need the title in the spreadsheet itself. Then I'm going to lock or freeze row 1 because I have title, author, whatever. It looks nice and neat. And I'm going to fill that with yellow. I'm going to center all the text, and I'm going to make all the text the same. I don't like Arial, so I try to use that in Consolata a little bit. I'm going to shrink some of this stuff so I can see it. We have some DRA levels in there. We have some guided reading levels in there. Genres are in there, so on and so forth, quantity, things like that, book level. And I'm just going to delete these out because we're not going to need it for today's example. Let's see, delete column. Now, excellent. Then we're going to filter them. So I apply my filter. Then I'm going to say I only want to look at fiction. So notice here I can look at all the values in the genre column, and I'm going to say clear, show me fiction only. And if I need to search for it, I can do that, and it'll show me fiction. And I'm going to say okay. So now I'm only looking at fiction books that are rated. Now we're going to look at quantity and DRA level, but quantity specifically. So quantity is one of those things where this seems to be a book database. So how many do we have left? And we want to know when we don't have as many left as we would want, and maybe we would need to purchase. So I'm going to click quantity, column F, and I'm going to go into format, and I'm going to go down to conditional formatting. So formatting has to do with how it looks and feels. Conditional formatting says, make it look this way based on a certain rule that I set up. So I'm going to click conditional formatting. And in this case, I don't want to just format a single color because I want to know from high to low. So I'm going to go to color scale, and I'm going to choose something that's pretty easy to understand, but maybe in reverse, right? So if we don't have as many books left, I want it to be red. And if we have plenty left over, I want it to be green. And I'll show you how that works here in a little bit. And then I'm going to say done. The way this color scale works is that it automatically picks up the minimum value and then the maximum value. And you can style that to your heart's content. So you can say, I want to scale from sort of like super red to super green. And I want the middle value to be yellow. And then you build your own custom color scale. Why is that helpful? I'll show you. So now as you're scrolling down through and you're looking at your books or whatever, and you're planning for instruction, you know that, for example, here, Sally Murphy, whatever book this is, be careful, right? The Sally Murphy book, you don't have a whole lot for. Let's see, I'm getting some feedback here. If you could mute yourself if you're in that call, that would be helpful. Likewise, if we're planning for a large team, right, you can say, okay, carrot seed, we have 16 of those, so that's good to go. Just helps you do a color scale. You could do the same thing with testing scores. You could do the same thing with any kind of an ordered list or sort of a numerical list from high to low. You can do it from ratings, rating scale if you're collecting feedback in a Google form. And then of course you can sort from A to Z. And if we sort from A to Z, you'll see it in the rainbow color. So 3 is the lowest value. And as it goes up, it'll turn greener and greener and greener, all the way up to 18, I suspect, right? Now, if we made a lot of these 18, we would see the green color shift, but then we have our own sort of a color scale. So that's a little bit about how conditional formatting would function. We could do the same thing with the DRA level. Just highlight column C and say, go to color scale. And we want it to be from maybe red to green, depending on, how you want it to function. And again, you can make it very red to very green to yellow in the middle, depending on what you want to do. And then you have yourself an idea of the color scale based on the DRA level. Now, some of these filters in here in between, you'll notice are not doing it. And the reason is because the conditional formatting doesn't really understand 40 to 42. If we change this to 40, it would automatically label it. And so you have to go through your data set and kind of have an idea of what's going on. And here's 60 to 80. I'm going to say, well, it's going to be 65 then. And then notice that it kind of does that automatically. And then an unknown, you could set it at 0, and then that would be the lowest value of the scale. And then you would have an idea what's going on. So then at any given time, you could have an idea of like, okay, super duper sunflower seeds, DRA level 16. How many do we have left? 11. Yep. So that's acceptable. And you could start using color with your numbers as opposed to any other way of sorting and filtering. So that's a little bit about conditional formatting. DRA level again, right? So if you're doing this, if it's a number, sort it A to Z, and it knows what to do. And then you have them sorted by DRA level. And if you wanted to then sort it by author's last name, you could do that, right? So filtering is very, very powerful. If you wanted to filter by book title, right? Now you kind of have an idea of, okay, first one there, 7 times 9 equals trouble, right? DRA level is 40, so let's fix it. And then we have 8 left, so on and so forth. So sometimes you have to play with your data, work with it a little bit so that it can work for you, and that to make it really helpful. The last thing I wanted to show you, just because I think it's kind of neat, is there's a formula called Sparkline, and then we're gonna clean up here. Sparkline is a way of showing a graph inside of a cell. This is like overkill probably, but we'll get there. Let's see, question from Danielle. Am I able to select only a few colors instead of it fading by itself? Yes. So if you go to single color scale, that's where you could say everyone above 80 would be blue, everyone above 60 would be so on and so forth, whatever it is. I know a lot of reading scores or reading levels use that, and that's very simple to do. You would just have to build in a couple of conditional formattings to say if it's larger than this, then make it this color. If it's larger than this, make it this color, and kind of stack it on top of each other. That way you can get your reading groups. I know we use that here. So I think it's blue, yellow, red, green, or something like that. So finishing out with Sparkline, just quick Sparkline, and you could play with this to your heart's content. So if we want to look at Andy's scores from Q1 to Q4, how did he do in a graphical representation as opposed to just looking at the numbers? Use Sparkline for a quick idea of how he performed, and obviously can drag that down. And it's actually then a Sparkline, a graph, like a mini graph inside of a cell. And then you could size that, do whatever you wanted to. That'd be a quick way to get an idea of how are they doing? Are they track, especially for progress monitoring, like are they trending upwards? Are they kind of not so trending, right? Or are they trending to disaster? Super helpful. Sparkline takes a little bit to get used to. You can do a couple of things too with columns and bars and things like that, but you can build some pretty cool dashboards for yourself. So I would definitely recommend that you spend some time with the Sparkline function if you're interested in that. So to review, we looked at the basics. We sorted some data. We filtered some data a couple times, validated data by kind of going in and making sure that it was actually the data that we wanted. We changed the data. Remember, we put the concatenate, put it together, we split them apart, and then we formatted, did some different things to make sure that it works for us. I hope you've enjoyed it. It's 9:40, it's our time. I think the next session for today's conference, it starts at 9:50. So I'm gonna take a little bit of a break. My next session here is going to be effective use of Google Forms. It'll be the same meeting link where we will look at some of the basic and advanced and intermediate uses of Google Forms. So if you want to, we'd love to have you in that session. Starts at 9:50. I'm going to sort of end this meeting and then I'm going to start it back up. It's the same link. So if you want to join me, feel free to come on down. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your day. And if you have any questions, reach out. Feel free to contact me and we'll go from there. Have a good day.